So I have to admit, today I'm a tad annoyed. I am annoyed because it has taken this long for me to finally realise with absolute certainty that my Prime Minister does not represent the interests of the United Kingdom and does not truly reflect on the vote of the referendum. So 2 years ago we had a referendum. In that referendum there was a ballot. Simply remain or leave were the options. Over time people have asked and shifted goalposts in doing so. We did not agree the terms to our exit, to which I have to reply, and have done so many times. When I voted leave, I voted to leave the EU. Therefore, I did not vote to remain a part of the single market, as that is a part of the EU. I did not vote to remain a part of the customs union, as that is also a part of the EU. I did not vote to remain a part of the common fisheries policy. Now, over the last 2 years, continuing my endeavours to try and understand the EU more, I have come to accept there are parts of the EU that we should enshrine in our own law. Even our Prime Minister said that we wanted to become a sovereign nation. However, with her new policy that she is putting forward, I don't agree. Now, just to be clear, the things I think we should enshrine in our law would include employment law and certain aspects of agriculture and farming. Not all, though, because EU law on that makes it very difficult for us to maintain our land. I would also argue the current rules that the EU has on things like water, which is why we had to sell it off in the first place because we could not afford to get it to the standard the EU is okay with. We Brits don't really care much, as long as we can fit a tea bag in it. In any case, with what the Prime Minister has put forward after a crunch summit at Chequers, David Davis, our Brexit Secretary, has resigned. Now, he did do an interview on ITV, which I've linked below. Feel free to watch it. He's pretty clear on why he could not support the government's new position, because it would actually go against what the Prime Minister has in fact said in Prime Minister's Questions, where she has outright said leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, but her new policy would indicate no, that's not what's happening at all. Another shock resignation would include Boris Johnson, who in fact penned quite a lengthy letter which has been covered in an article which I will link below. In that letter he says, "It is more than 2 years since the British people voted to leave the European Union on an unambiguous and categorical promise that if they did so, they would be taking back control of their democracy. They were told that they would be able to manage their own immigration policy, repatriate the sums of UK cash currently spent by the EU, and above all, that they would be able to pass laws independently and in the interests of the people of this country. Brexit should be about opportunity and hope. It should be a chance to do things differently, to be more nimble and dynamic, and to maximise the particular advantages of the UK as an open, outward-looking global economy. That dream is dying, suffocated by needless self-doubt." Now, Boris Johnson did in fact call your entire idea, Theresa May, a massive turd. So let's have a look at that idea, because I think we should understand best what it is you've put forward. So basically, what Theresa May's put forward is basically a soft Brexit, and there are 6 key points from it. 1. A common rulebook would keep British producers bound by EU rules on goods including farmers. 2. Parliament would oversee these rules, but deciding not to abide them would have consequences, which raises an alarm bell. Either you, Theresa May, are doing this because you're actually stupid, or because you want to beat the public into begging to rejoin the EU. And I say this because what has been proposed means that we don't have a say on the rules being put forward to us by an outside factor that we have to obey, word verbatim, and yet we have no control over it, whereas if we're in the EU at least we have a vote on it. Even Remain voters find this to be fucking stupid, and I will link a suitable interview down below with Batten and I believe a Remain campaigner, where they both said Theresa May's new idea is an absolute shambles. 3. Joint UK-EU Committee to oversee and rule on disputes, but these would be settled based on more than 40 years of EU laws. What's the point of the committee then, other than to make us look like we actually have some influence when in fact we have none? 4. Britain to effectively stay in the EU's customs union, described as a combined customs territory to avoid hard border with Ireland. At this moment in time, I no longer give a fuck about that border. Put a hard border there, quite frankly. I don't care anymore. 5. Britain to be responsible for collecting EU tariffs and implementing EU trade policy for goods passing through the UK. We're not their keeper. Who the fuck agreed to that? 6. Britain to leave EU rules for services, with banks losing crucial EU passporting rights that allows them to sell their services across Europe. I'm okay with this. Now, to make this point quite interesting, Theresa May did not tell her own cabinet or MPs about her idea. It has now been found out that she actually took it to Merkel first. You, the Prime Minister of this country, represent us, and you put forward an idea that we do not agree on. Hell, even Jeremy Corbyn, during a 2-hour interrogation in Parliament, criticised you for this, where he actually said that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Davis had abandoned a sinking ship, shattering the illusion of unity initially surrounding the Chequers plan. Also pointing out that it is clear this government cannot secure a good deal for Britain. Granted, he can't either. We know this. But we now know what Theresa May's new strategy is. Basically, she walks up to Barnier, turns around and bends over. I know that your new idea has been supported by Kenneth Clark and a bunch of other very ardent Remain voters, more commonly named the Ramonas, but at this point I have to now make it quite clear. I have zero confidence in you as a leader. That's not to say I had any to begin with, but now I know you are no longer interested in serving the people. I, like many others, believe it is time for you to resign. You are going to lose the next election. You will either leave before then, or when Jeremy Corbyn beats you in 2022, possibly sooner, because there is no way the Conservative Party will win with you as the Prime Minister. And I say that now with absolute certainty, having done many responses to Prime Minister's questions on my second channel. Even though Corbyn hasn't put forward any policy whatsoever, he has just character assassinated you and made you look like a fool. And you have brought forward an idea that actually goes against everything you said you would do. That, by definition, means you have Theresa May betrayed the will of the people. That, to me, tells me you are no longer fit to hold that esteemed office, and your premiership should come to an end now. Now, since David Davis and Boris Johnson resigned, a fellow Brexiteer has taken over the position of David Davis, who Paul Joseph Watson pointed out some rather interesting points about, and I'm going to play that clip now.
Her prime negotiator is a Remainer who in his Oxford days was a Soviet fanboy who defended Stalin and implied communism was preferable to capitalism.
Interesting to note, another thing is that while Boris Johnson resigned, he's been replaced by Jeremy Hunt, former Health Secretary. I don't really have much to say on that. It is important to note that of all the politicians in the cabinet, Jeremy Hunt has the one face you want to punch. I'm not saying you should though. Now, to be clear, while watching the 2-hour statement and summary questioning of the Prime Minister on this new plan, I came to the realisation that a lot of MPs support this. Jeremy Corbyn just wanted to stir the pot because obviously now that Johnson and Davis are out, it has shown a huge amount of division amongst the party, although I would point out, division is not necessarily a bad thing. It's always good to not be totally unified so that you can challenge each other. But when someone exhausts options that could never work to begin with, like the first 2 ideas the Prime Minister had for tackling the hard border and trade-related issues, both of which were absolute dogshit, there is a point where you can no longer work together, and understandably so. So where does Boris Johnson and David Davis fit into this now? Well, Boris is quite powerful, and he could push for a vote of no confidence. That could in fact happen, and if it did, it would be the end of Theresa May, which then leads to the inevitable question of who takes over from Theresa May, and I honestly don't know. Everyone mentions Jacob Rees-Mogg, but he doesn't want the job, so you're left with someone like Gove or Johnson, which is what people should have had to begin with had Gove not stabbed Boris Johnson in the back during their leadership thing to decide the Prime Minister. That was eventually Theresa May. Had Boris Johnson won it like most believed he would, I think this would be a bit different. To finish my rambles on this, because obviously I'm annoyed, I don't know if you can tell in my very monotone voice, but I'm seething. This entire idea put forward is a massive sellout, and does not benefit anyone to the point where even Remain voters think you're an idiot. This week, Prime Minister's questions hopefully will be on, and I honestly believe minus the obvious character assassinations of Johnson and Davis by Corbyn, I can see you, Theresa May, getting absolutely reamed by everyone, even the SNP, although you can be sure they'll be chuffed to bits that we made that concession with the customs union, which I'd like to point out, now that you've made that precious little concession, we'll probably see Barnier, the negotiator for the EU, start asking for more. You see, whereas David Davis gave them some over the time he was in charge of negotiations, to make sure that we had a little leeway here and there and agreed terms, with the EU unflinchingly not moving at all because they seem to be fucking stupid. Now that you've given them something, you've given them a golden egg, they're going to take liberties, because that is what any good person would do. There's now an opening to absolutely abuse you, and quite frankly, I think you deserve it, Teresa. One of the biggest fears that many Leave voters had was that the EU was starting to become a federalised government, was that it was starting to create its own army, dictate and take powers away from governments. By agreeing to this, you are actually reinforcing that idea that Margaret Thatcher herself put forward in a video that I saw by Paul Joseph Watson that I had originally considered doing an embellished response video to, but not to what he says, merely to expand on ideas he put forward, because there were gaps in it, but much like anything PJW does, he stays straight to the point and sensationalizes it to perfection, whereas I prattle on because I like to waffle. I'm okay with this. In any case, Theresa May, to you, I ask you now to resign. As a final thing before I finish this video, if you agree with what I have said, feel free to mirror this, because while I have a fantastic reach and I'm eternally grateful, I would love for more people to see this. You don't have to link me or anything like that. I just don't care. I just want to try and see if I can get as many people to watch this as possible so they can understand that the soft Brexit option keeps us tied to the EU, but with no say over what they make us do, which is essentially what happens. A committee is one thing, but since the EU has proven itself to be unflinching in its resolve, let's go with that, resolve, that's a nice word. We know they're not going to agree to anything we say, even if we disagree with them. They will just flex their muscle, because you've given them power. And much like in that tweet I sent to you, Theresa May, if you don't resign, this would be just like the Liberal Democrats in 2010, you feckless worm. So I hope everyone has a lovely day, a Tuesday I think, yes, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, goddowns.
In your ass.
Imagine my shock